Welcome to another Scott Tanner Violin video, where I create videos to help you become a more successful violin student. And if you haven't had a chance yet, jump over to my YouTube channel, Scott Tanner Violin, where you can like and subscribe to my channel to get all kinds of violin videos. This video is all about Perpetual Motion in A, the 9th piece in Suzuki Violin Book 1 repertoire. If you're ready to begin, let's dig in. There are 4 teaching points. The first one is that this piece is written entirely in eighth notes. The second teaching point is about the bow articulation, which we'll cover a little bit later on, which is either martelé or sempre staccato. The third teaching point is that this piece also has broken thirds. The fourth teaching point is that we have this piece in the eighth note version, which is the theme, and also a variation for 16th notes, which we'll get to later in the video. Now that we have reviewed the teaching points, let's continue with specific left-hand technique items. Left-hand technique for perpetual motion involves broken thirds. Broken thirds is a pattern within a scale. The interval of a third is 2 steps along a scale. If you play one note, skip a note, and then play the next note, you will have played an interval of a third. Here is a demonstration of playing a 1-octave A major broken third pattern. I would also encourage you to repeat this section of the video many times until you're successfully able to play a broken third pattern. The second item for left-hand technique is to get into the habit of leaving your fingers down as often as possible. This will help build a more consistent, good intonation foundation. The last item for left-hand technique is to know that there's an option of using either fourth finger or the open E string for perpetual motion. I prefer teaching that my students must use their fourth finger because it's time to get this finger moving and get this finger into play. Here's a little exercise that I teach my students for using a fourth finger. Notice how I leave my fingers down on the fingerboard and that they're all spaced out in the correct finger pattern so that I can grab that fourth finger. And then you could work a little bit faster. We'll now talk about the right hand technique for perpetual motion. In the Suzuki book it says sempre staccato. Sempre meaning always, and staccato is just short and separated. So always short and separated. You'll also notice that there are little dots above every single note, which also just implies that the bow stroke is short. Some players prefer to think of the articulation as a martelé bow stroke. And if you want more information on the martelé bow stroke, you can go to my previous video on Allegro and get that information. Whether you think of this in terms of sempre staccato or a martelé bow stroke, one thing is consistent, and that's the placement of the bow. And in this piece, we want to play middle to upper half of the bow. Let me demonstrate that. Think back to twinkle variations for bow placement. Now that we've covered the left and the right hand technique, we're ready to move on to the practice segment of this video. The practice tempo is just a slower tempo so that you can stay caught up with me. Also remember to take a look up here on the screen for any thoughts or comments I may have as we're playing along. And the last thing is I would like to encourage you to repeat this practice segment of the video many times so that you're very successful and can play through it without any mistakes before moving on to the performance tempo. So here's the practice version of Perpetual Motion in A, beginning with an introduction. Well, how did it go? Were you able to get through without any mistakes? If so, you're ready to move on to the practice segment of this video. And if you need to slow this part of it down or want to speed it up, go to the settings wheel found in the lower right-hand side of this video, and you can adjust the playback speed. Let's begin again with an introduction at a performance tempo. Pretty fast tempo, isn't it? Well, I hope you were able to stay caught up with me. And go ahead and play this part of the video over and over until you can play it at that tempo. After you can play it at this tempo, then you're ready to move on to the 16th notes, or the variation of Perpetual Motion. Here's Perpetual Motion in A, the variation, playing 16th notes at a slow tempo with an introduction. Even though this variation seems really fast, it's really just doubling up the bow speed. The finger speed is the same. Let's move on now to the performance tempo of this variation to Perpetual Motion in A. Well, how did it go? Were you able to stay caught up and be able to get through it without mistakes? If so, congratulations, and you're ready to move on to the next piece, Perpetual Motion in D. In the meantime, keep practicing, and I hope to see you over there real soon.